If you've ever felt like you're constantly chasing someone who's always pulling away, or like you're the one running while someone else clings too tightly, you might be stuck in the anxious-avoidant trap. This dynamic is emotionally exhausting, but here's the truth. It can be fixed if both partners are willing to grow. So how do you break the cycle and build something secure? Let's get into it. One of the most important and often overlooked steps in fixing an anxious-avoidant relationship is recognizing and understanding the pattern. This pattern doesn't show up overnight. It's formed over time, usually when two people with different emotional needs come together and unconsciously activate each other's deepest fears. In the anxious-avoidant dynamic, there's typically one person who needs constant reassurance, closeness, and emotional connection to feel secure, while the other person values independence, emotional distance, and personal space as a way to maintain a sense of control and safety. These two responses are not just surface-level preferences. They're rooted in early experiences of love, loss, or neglect, and they deeply influence the way people show up in relationships. What makes this pattern so tricky is how easily it escalates. The anxious partner senses distance and responds by moving closer. That could look like calling repeatedly, texting often, needing validation after small disagreements, or interpreting silence as a threat to the relationship. To them, this behavior feels like an attempt to restore connection, but for the avoidant partner, that pursuit can feel overwhelming. Their nervous system interprets closeness not as safety, but as pressure. So they pull back, maybe not always physically, but emotionally. They may get quiet, delay responses, get distracted, or emotionally shut down. To them, they're just trying to create space to feel grounded again. But to the anxious partner, that distance feels like abandonment. And so they pursue even more. The more one reaches, the more the other retreats. It's a loop, and until it's recognized, it keeps repeating. This loop isn't a sign of incompatibility, despite how it might feel. It's a sign of two nervous systems reacting to stress in different ways. The anxious partner often has a fear of being alone, not mattering, or being left behind. The avoidant partner often has a fear of being engulfed, controlled, or losing their independence. What one person interprets as love, the other might experience as pressure. What one sees as healthy space, the other experiences as neglect. That's why this relationship dynamic can be so emotionally exhausting, because both people feel misunderstood and both are acting from a place of pain. Recognizing the pattern means looking past the behavior and seeing the fear that drives it. It means no longer labeling the other person as needy or cold, and instead starting to understand the emotional survival mechanisms at play. This doesn't excuse unhealthy behavior, but it does explain it. It brings clarity to moments that used to feel confusing. For example, if you're the anxious one, you may start noticing how a slight shift in tone or delay in a text sends you spiraling, not because your partner did something terribly wrong, but because it triggered an old fear of rejection. And if you're the avoidant one, you may realize that your need to retreat during conflict isn't really about your partner being too much. It's about your own discomfort with emotional vulnerability that feels unsafe because of what you've learned in the past. Understanding this dynamic also requires you to get honest about your own patterns. It's easy to see what the other person is doing wrong. It's much harder to turn the mirror around. But real change starts with self-awareness. If you constantly need reassurance, ask yourself why the absence of validation feels like a crisis. If you constantly need space, ask yourself why closeness feels like a threat. These questions aren't about blame, they're about discovery. The more aware you become of your own triggers, the less power they have over you. And the less you react from those triggers, the more you create space for healthier, more grounded interactions. This isn't just about emotional awareness, it's also about learning to slow the cycle down. When you notice yourself getting triggered, instead of reacting immediately, pause, observe. Ask yourself what you're actually feeling beneath the surface. Are you feeling abandoned, unimportant, suffocated, or controlled? The clarity that comes from naming your emotions gives you the power to respond thoughtfully instead of impulsively. And when both partners begin doing this, even imperfectly, it interrupts the pattern. It breaks the automatic responses that keep the anxious-avoidant cycle alive. Because what fuels the cycle isn't just the behavior, it's the unconscious reaction to fear and the story each person tells themselves about what that fear means. Understanding the pattern is a turning point. It's what allows both people to stop personalizing the other's behavior and start seeing it for what it is, a protective strategy. It allows for empathy to enter the space where there used to be only frustration. And with empathy, there's room for new behavior to grow. Once you understand the anxious-avoidant dynamic, the next crucial step is learning how to build emotional safety through honest, non-reactive communication. Emotional safety is the foundation of any secure relationship, but for anxious and avoidant partners, it often feels like a moving target. The anxious partner wants to talk things out, to express every feeling as it comes, hoping that openness will bring them closer. The avoidant partner, on the other hand, often withdraws when emotions run high, feeling overwhelmed by the intensity and unsure of how to respond. This difference in communication style isn't just frustrating. It creates a disconnect where both partners feel unheard and unseen. In order to build emotional safety, both people have to create an environment where vulnerability isn't punished, ignored, or used against each other. That begins with slowing down reactions. When you feel triggered, whether it's because someone didn't respond quickly enough or because you're being asked to open up when you're not ready, the instinct is to react fast, to defend, to accuse, or to shut down. But emotional safety requires the opposite. It asks for pause, it asks for reflection. Instead of jumping into defense or retreat, it invites both people to breathe, to feel what's happening in their body, and then respond with intention instead of instinct. This doesn't mean pretending everything is fine or suppressing emotion. In fact, honest communication means saying what's real, but in a way that creates connection instead of division. That means speaking from your experience, not your assumptions. There's a difference between saying, "You don't care about me," and saying, "When I don't hear from you, I start to feel afraid that I'm not important to you." One attacks, the other reveals. One pushes the other person away, the other invites them closer. And for the avoidant partner, instead of saying, "You're too much," they might say, "I feel overwhelmed when there's a lot of emotion all at once, and I'm still learning how to stay present during those moments." It's this kind of communication that builds trust, not because it's perfectly delivered, but because it's honest, human, and not rooted in blame. A major part of building emotional safety is developing the ability to tolerate discomfort. For the anxious partner, it's the discomfort of sitting with uncertainty or not getting immediate reassurance. For the avoidant partner, it's the discomfort of staying emotionally present when their instinct says to run. Both experiences require courage, and both require knowing that the relationship can hold those moments without falling apart. When people feel safe, they stop reacting from fear. They start responding from love, and that shift changes everything. It's also important to create a rhythm of communication that works for both people. That might mean agreeing to have difficult conversations at a set time, so neither person feels ambushed or ignored. It might mean checking in daily in a way that feels meaningful but not suffocating. It might mean practicing how to repair after conflict rather than pretending it didn't happen or letting resentment build. Repair doesn't always look like a long conversation. It can be as simple as saying, "I know that didn't go well. I want us to do better next time." These small moments of accountability send the message that you care, that you're trying, and that the relationship matters enough to tend to. Building emotional safety also means being consistent. Words matter, but they don't mean much without follow-through. If you say you're going to call, call. If you say you need space, explain what that looks like and when you'll reconnect. If you say you're working on being more open, show up with small truths, even if you can't share everything yet. Consistency breeds trust, and trust is what makes safety real. Not just an idea, but an experience that both people can feel in their nervous systems. Without consistency, emotional safety breaks down because each person is left guessing what the other will do next. And underneath all of this is a deeper truth. Emotional safety is not about never getting triggered. It's about knowing that when you do get triggered, the relationship is strong enough to hold the moment. It's about knowing that your partner won't weaponize your vulnerability or punish your honesty. That even when things feel messy or confusing, you're still on the same team. And when that sense of shared safety exists, something powerful begins to happen. Conversations that once led to shutdowns start leading to deeper understanding. Emotions that used to spark fights start creating intimacy. And the walls that kept you disconnected slowly begin to come down because they're no longer needed to feel safe. In an anxious-avoidant relationship, one of the most misunderstood yet essential tools for healing and growth is setting boundaries that create space and connection. For many people, boundaries sound like a wall, a rejection, a way to push someone away, or a sign that the relationship isn't working. But in truth, boundaries are the structure that allows love to breathe. They are not about pushing people out. They are about defining the space where both people feel safe, respected, and able to show up as their full selves without fear of losing the relationship or losing themselves. For the anxious partner, boundaries can be terrifying. When you crave closeness to feel secure, the idea of stepping back, even slightly, can feel like abandonment. The anxious person often confuses boundaries with disconnection, thinking that if they don't express every emotion right away, or if they don't stay constantly close to their partner, they'll be forgotten, left, or replaced. That fear drives them to override their own needs in favor of staying close at any cost. But this creates a pattern where they abandon themselves to avoid being abandoned by someone else. Setting boundaries in this case is an act of reclaiming dignity. It means learning to soothe your own nervous system before turning to your partner. It means creating enough space between the trigger and the response so that communication doesn't come from panic, but from groundedness. On the other side, the avoidant partner often views boundaries as the only way to protect their independence. They might already feel like they're drowning in the relationship, not because their partner is doing something wrong, but because closeness triggers old fears of being controlled or losing autonomy. For them, boundaries can be a defense mechanism that becomes rigid and isolating. The challenge for the avoidant partner is to see that connection doesn't have to mean enmeshment, that it's possible to be close to someone without being consumed. True boundaries for the avoidant person are not just about creating distance, but about learning how to stay present within connection. It's not about running away. It's about learning how to remain emotionally available without feeling overwhelmed. Both people need to shift their mindset around what a healthy boundary actually looks like. It's not a punishment. It's not a silent treatment. It's not emotional withdrawal. It's clarity. It's saying, this is what I need to be able to love you well. It's learning to say no when something doesn't feel right without guilt. It's learning to say yes to closeness without fear. And most importantly, it's understanding that boundaries are not fixed rules. They're fluid agreements that grow with the relationship. A boundary might be as simple as saying, when we argue, I need 10 minutes to breathe before we talk. It might mean agreeing not to resolve big issues over text. It might mean deciding together how often you need check-ins to feel connected, so one partner doesn't feel smothered while the other doesn't feel neglected. These are not dramatic shifts. They're small, intentional decisions that reduce anxiety and prevent withdrawal. When both people are clear on their needs and limits, the relationship becomes a safer place to be. There's less confusion, less guessing, less walking on eggshells. Boundaries also show up in how we respect our own time and energy. The anxious partner might need to learn how to stop monitoring their partner's emotional state and start tuning into their own. That means recognizing when you're giving too much, when you're chasing instead of connecting, and when your attempts to get closer are actually making you feel worse. For the avoidant partner, it might mean noticing when they're shutting down, not because they need space, but because they don't know how to cope with intimacy. That's a boundary too, the boundary between self-protection and self-sabotage. A relationship without boundaries quickly becomes chaotic. The anxious partner feels like they're constantly trying to hold things together, over-functioning, overthinking, and often overextending. The avoidant partner feels like they're constantly trying to escape, under-communicating, under-engaging, and eventually shutting down. But when boundaries are clearly communicated and mutually respected, the dynamic starts to shift. The anxious partner feels more in control of their own emotions, which ironically makes them less anxious. The avoidant partner feels less cornered and more willing to lean in, which ironically makes them feel safer in the relationship. The goal is not to eliminate the need for space or closeness, but to honor both. A relationship doesn't thrive when only one person feels comfortable. It thrives when both people feel like they can take a breath, be honest, and know they won't lose each other for doing so. Boundaries allow that kind of love to take root, love that's not based on fear, but on mutual respect and emotional clarity. One of the most essential but often neglected parts of repairing an anxious-avoidant relationship is the individual work each person must do to heal their own attachment wounds. While it's tempting to focus entirely on how your partner shows up, what they're doing wrong, what they're not giving, how they're failing to meet your needs, the real transformation happens when both people begin to turn inward and ask a much harder question. How am I contributing to this cycle? And what within me needs to heal so that I can love without fear, without control, and without emotional withdrawal? In the anxious-avoidant dynamic, both people are operating from survival strategies that were likely formed long before the relationship even began. The anxious partner often carries wounds from inconsistency or emotional neglect, where love was present but unpredictable, and reassurance had to be earned through overfunctioning, people-pleasing, or hypervigilance. This creates a need for constant contact, repeated validation, and a tendency to fear that any distance is the beginning of the end. That fear doesn't just live in the mind, it shows up in the body as anxiety, tightness, overthinking, and emotional urgency. Healing this attachment wound isn't about getting a partner to show up differently. It's about learning how to show up for yourself in those moments when fear takes over. It's about developing the emotional tools to sit in discomfort, to ride the wave of uncertainty, and to self-regulate without seeking immediate rescue. That kind of healing looks like journaling through your emotional triggers instead of firing off a text in a panic. It looks like noticing when you're confusing someone else's silence with rejection and reminding yourself that you are not powerless. It looks like learning to soothe your nervous system with breath, movement, solitude, or creativity. Anything that reconnects you to your sense of worth and safety without relying on someone else to give it to you. It's building a relationship with yourself that is so solid, so compassionate, and so grounded that you no longer need to beg for love. You become a person who can receive it without fear of it disappearing. On the flip side, the avoidant partner often carries wounds from environments where emotional expression was unsafe, intimacy was overwhelming, or boundaries were repeatedly violated. As a result, they learned that closeness comes at a cost, that love equals loss of freedom, loss of identity, or the risk of being controlled. This fear of being engulfed doesn't usually show up as panic. It shows up as detachment, emotional numbing, hyper-independence, or an internal shutdown when feelings get too intense. Avoidants are often misread as cold or uncaring, but in reality, many are deeply emotional people who simply never learned how to safely stay connected when things get vulnerable. Healing for the avoidant means getting honest about how emotional distance has become a crutch. It means asking where that reflex to shut down really comes from, and who taught you that emotions are dangerous. It means leaning into the discomfort of being seen and staying open, even when your instinct is to run. This work isn't about forcing yourself to become someone you're not. It's about expanding your emotional range so that intimacy doesn't feel like a threat. It looks like sharing your thoughts before they bottle up and explode. It looks like noticing when you're withdrawing and choosing to stay present instead of disappearing. It looks like being brave enough to admit that connection scares you and being willing to stay anyway. For both people, this healing journey is about responsibility, not in a burdensome way, but in a liberating one. Because when you stop expecting your partner to fix what you've never fully faced in yourself, you start reclaiming your power. You stop reacting from old pain and start responding from conscious choice. You stop blaming the dynamic and start transforming it, one small moment at a time. Doing this work separately doesn't mean growing apart. It means growing strong enough to meet each other fully. It means becoming aware of the stories you carry about love. Stories like, I'm too much, no one stays, I'll lose myself if I get too close, needing someone is weakness, and then doing the internal work to rewrite them. It means getting support, whether that's therapy, coaching, books, or a deeper spiritual practice. It means taking responsibility for your patterns, not with shame, but with curiosity and compassion. The relationship can only grow as much as each person is willing to grow. You can't build a secure bond on top of unhealed wounds. And no matter how strong the chemistry or how deep the love, if you're constantly trying to fill emotional holes with your partner's behavior, the foundation will always be shaky. True connection happens when two people, both rooted in self-awareness, self-trust, and emotional resilience, come together not to complete each other, but to complement each other. When healing happens separately, the relationship becomes a safer, freer, more fulfilling place for both people to thrive. To truly fix an anxious-avoidant relationship, the final piece that shifts the dynamic from survival mode into something secure and thriving is learning how to build new habits of connection that are rooted in consistency, patience, and emotional attunement. This isn't about grand romantic gestures or intense emotional breakthroughs. It's about creating small, repeated moments where both people feel seen, valued, and safe enough to be their true selves. These habits don't develop overnight, but over time they start to rewire the nervous system and slowly replace the old dance of fear and disconnection with a new rhythm of trust and stability. In the anxious-avoidant cycle, most of the pain doesn't come from a lack of love. It comes from the inconsistency in how that love is given and received. The anxious partner craves reassurance, but often goes about it in a way that feels overwhelming to the avoidant. The avoidant partner wants connection but needs to experience it without pressure or urgency, which can feel to the anxious partner like emotional neglect. The result is a pattern of push and pull where no one feels fully settled. What breaks that pattern is not intense conversations or analyzing the relationship to death. What breaks it is showing up in ways that are calm, dependable, and emotionally generous, especially in the everyday moments that seem small but carry the most weight. One of the most powerful habits a couple in this dynamic can build is the practice of checking in with each other emotionally without waiting for conflict. That could mean carving out just 10 minutes a day to talk about how each of you are feeling. Not to fix anything, not to debate, but to stay connected. When the anxious partner knows there's a space to express themselves regularly, the urgency to be heard starts to fade. When the avoidant partner knows there's structure around emotional expression, it feels more manageable and less overwhelming. This isn't about endless heart-to-hearts. It's about establishing a rhythm where emotions aren't surprises or threats. They're part of the relationship's language. Another essential habit is learning how to respond rather than react when triggers arise. For the anxious partner, that might look like pausing before reaching out when they feel distant from their partner, taking a breath, grounding themselves, and asking if they're reacting from fear or responding from intention. For the avoidant partner, it might look like staying engaged in the conversation, even when their instinct is to shut down, taking a moment to acknowledge that they're feeling overwhelmed but choosing not to run. These moments might seem small in isolation, but over time they build a new foundation of emotional safety. And each time one person chooses a healthier response, they create space for the other to do the same. Consistency also plays a huge role. Relationships thrive when they feel predictable in the best way. That doesn't mean boring, it means reliable. It means if you say you're going to call, you do. If you know your partner gets anxious when plans are left open-ended, you follow through or clearly communicate changes. If your partner needs space to reset, you respect that without taking it as a rejection. These small gestures create a track record of trust. They teach the anxious partner that distance doesn't equal abandonment, and they teach the avoidant partner that closeness doesn't always come with a demand. Building new habits also means consciously celebrating moments of progress. It's easy to get lost in what's not working or what still needs to be fixed. But if one of you opens up a little more than usual, or if one of you handles a trigger more calmly than before, that deserves acknowledgement. Not in a performative way, but in a way that reinforces the direction you're both heading. These small victories compound. They start to form a new story, a story where both people are learning, evolving, and moving toward each other instead of away. Patience is key in all of this. Healing an anxious-avoidant relationship is not a straight line. There will be setbacks, misunderstandings, and moments where old patterns creep back in. But that doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're human. What matters most is that both people are committed not just to loving each other, but to doing love differently. That commitment isn't made in dramatic declarations. It's made in how you speak to each other when you're tired, how you respond when emotions run high, and how you show up after a disagreement. Emotional attunement is the thread that ties all these habits together. It's the practice of really tuning into your partner, not just hearing their words, but sensing what they're feeling beneath them. It's noticing when they're distant and gently checking in, or when they're overwhelmed and offering space without withdrawing your presence. It's building an awareness of each other's emotional world and making it a priority, not an afterthought. When both people feel emotionally attuned to, the dynamic begins to soften. The anxious partner no longer feels like they're fighting to be understood, and the avoidant partner no longer feels like they're being asked to give more than they can handle. These new habits are what allow love to grow not in intensity, but in depth, not in urgency, but in endurance. They don't erase your differences. They create a bridge between them. And over time, that bridge becomes the place where you meet again and again with less fear and more presence.